With the ginger dwarf from the north stepping down, you might wonder, who is this Humza Yousaf that the SNP have just decided to make their new leader? Presumably then will be the new leader of Scotland. He is the first Muslim to lead Scotland. But I think that's the least relevant thing actually about him. His religion, I think, has very little to do with the guy he actually is. And the guy he actually is a complete buffoon, a complete failure as a politician. He started off, after a few failed starts, as Transport Secretary. As Transport Secretary, he was caught driving a mate's car without insurance and was fined 300 quid and had 6 points put on his licence. He was also partly responsible for Scot Fail. I don't know if you remember, but his brilliant idea, along with others, was that in order for Scottish trains to try and run on time, they would stopping at the stations. So trains in Scotland stopped going to stations in order to try and run on time. I think maybe just overlooking slightly there, if I may, as an English person, the purpose of a train, which is typically to try and drop people off. But anyway, because he failed so brilliantly as Transport Secretary, the ginger dwarf from the north did the only thing that was possible and obviously promoted him. She then promoted him to Justice Secretary. And you may ask yourself, well, what qualifications did Humza Yousaf have as Justice Secretary? And the answer to that is none whatsoever. I guess he was ticking all the right boxes. He was the only Justice Secretary in the whole of Europe to be Justice Secretary without having a law degree. I mean, who needs actual qualifications if you tick all the right boxes? He was the one that came up with the hated bill, which was called the Hate Crime and Public Order Bill. And he wanted it to be an offence. And it kind of came into play that stirring up hatred, right, that's the definition that he brought in. If you stirred up hatred, you could be arrested and prosecuted for the crime of stirring up hatred. Now, can you imagine how broad and encompassing that is? I was caught up under this for a tweet where I referenced sweaty, sounds like Knox. I was called in Australia, where I was, by Police Scotland and threatened with repatriation for a tweet for stirring up hatred under this very bill. That's what this guy brought in. He also wanted it so that if people were having private conversations at their dinner table and one of the members at the dinner table perceived that someone was stirring up hatred, he believed police should intervene at the family dinner table and make an arrest because that was an offence. So that's him as Justice Secretary. And because he was such a failure as Justice Secretary, including some of his own social media gaffes, which of course were just brushed under the carpet, Nicola Sturgeon decided to promote him again. Because of his record of failures, she thought, I know, I'll make him one of the most important positions in Scotland, and she made him Health Secretary. So as Health Secretary, as we came into the pandemic, we had Humza Yousaf with his spectacular track record of failings in ScotRail and also as Justice Secretary, now in charge of health. So he went onto TV and said that children were being rushed to hospital because of COVID. And he came under massive fire for that because it wasn't accurate, it wasn't statistically true, and it whipped up the flames of fear, as so many others were doing, across the whole of Scotland. And this was the Health Secretary doing this. He also ran out of ambulances. Now, of course, health has been under pressure forever in Scotland. It has its worst waiting times in modern history under Humza. But he ran out of ambulances. He went on and told people to think twice before calling 999. 999 is the sort of thing you should be calling when you haven't got time to think, someone's had a heart attack or a stroke and you need help straight away. The building's on fire, 999. He told people to think twice. Oh, that person's had a stroke. What would Humza say I should do? And guess what he had to do? To cover the fact that he didn't have any ambulances, he had to bring in the British Army to cover for the ambulances, which is all fine. When I signed up to serve my country, anything was part of what I signed up for. But of course, what's so interesting about Humza is that he wants independence from the UK, from Britain. He wants an independent Scotland. He's going to push to have Scotland stand alone. So that's okay. But then how do you need army ambulances, British army ambulances? If you're so big and independent, surely you wouldn't need the help of the British Army. And Humza also called out rather gleefully that Brexit shouldn't stand. The Brexit shouldn't stand because only 52% of people wanted it. 48% of people wanted to remain. And that margin is not big enough. 52% is not enough. He wants to take an independent Scotland. He wants to rejoin the EU. He promotes the EU often against the democracy of the UK. The democratic wish of the people said we wanted Brexit. But guess what? Here's the rub. Humza Yousaf, how many people do you think voted for him? Only 70% of the SNP eligible to vote voted at all. 30% couldn't be bothered to show up. Maybe they knew it was already a done deal, given this guy gets promoted no matter what. But of the 70% that turned up, guess what? 48% wanted the other candidate. Only 52% wanted Humza. So is it now, Humza, that margin is big enough now that you've won, or is it still not big enough because Brexit didn't have a big enough margin? Which of those two things is it? And if you want to be independent and you want to rejoin the EU, are you respecting democracy when it suits you or not? And finally, and bear in mind at the front end of this, I said that him being a Muslim doesn't matter to me at all. Doesn't matter, even though he is ranting about white people as the enemy. He's in Parliament ranting about white people as the bad in society, how it's not okay that white people are in charge of stuff. But he is now going to have to pick up the gender recognition bill. And he says he supports it. He's all for LGBTQ, and he is for people being allowed to self-identify. So you don't have to go and see a psych. You don't have to live as the different gender for 2 years. You only have to do it for a couple of days, a couple of months. You don't have to be 18 to decide this anymore. You can be 16, so a child, and you can change your gender on a whim. You don't have to see a psych. All good. He's going to be pushing that through. So from a Muslim community standpoint, clearly I don't speak for anybody else. But how is that being true to your Muslim faith when we know that Muslim parents, such as the ones I work with at Anderton Park Primary, disagree with this being forced on young people, and they specifically disagree with it being taught in schools? Just highlighting some of the disastrous failings, some of the personal religious issues, and also a lot of the hypocrisy surrounding the brand new shiny leader of the SNP, Humza Yousaf.